In 1917, deep in the hills of northeast India, a tribe you've probably never heard of did something almost nobody else in India dared to do. They declared war on the British Empire. Not a protest, not a petition, a war fought village by village for 2 full years in jungle so thick the British Army could barely move through it. This is the story of the Anglo-Kuki War, and chances are no history class ever taught you about it. To understand this story, you need to picture where it happened. Tucked between Assam, Myanmar, and Bangladesh sits Manipur, a state most of India still doesn't think about. Its hills are steep, its jungles are dense, and for centuries they were home to the Kuki people. Dozens of clans, each led by its own hereditary chief, spread across hundreds of villages that the British Empire barely bothered to map, let alone govern closely. That distance from British control wasn't an accident. The Kuki hills were hard to reach, harder to rule, and the British mostly left them alone. As long as taxes were paid and order was kept from a distance through local intermediaries, that arrangement held for decades. Then came 1917, and the First World War changed everything. Thousands of miles away, in the trenches of France, the British Empire was bleeding men and desperate for labor. Not just soldiers, but workers. Digging trenches, building roads, carrying supplies. So the British turned to India's frontier hills, including Kuki territory, and issued an order. Villages must supply men for a labor corps to be sent overseas. For the Kuki chiefs, this wasn't a minor inconvenience. Taking their able-bodied men away meant leaving villages without protection, without hunters, without farmers, during planting season. And it landed on top of years of resentment. Local intermediaries called lambus, appointed to liaise between the British and the villages, were widely accused of corruption, inflating dues, pocketing payments meant for the chiefs. On top of that came a house tax and demands for free labor and supplies whenever British officials passed through, known as pothang. The Labor Corps order was the final straw. One by one, Kuki chiefs refused to comply. And in a region with no telegraph, no roads, no easy way for the British to send reinforcements quickly, that refusal turned into something the British had never expected from these hills: organized, coordinated resistance. By late 1917, it wasn't just one village pushing back. Chiefs began coordinating with each other. Men like Chenjapao of Aishan, Pache of Chasad, and Hutintang of Jampi, pooling fighters, sharing intelligence, and agreeing that no single village would face the British alone. What followed was not a battlefield war. It was something the British were far less prepared for. Guerrilla warfare in terrain that gave every advantage to the people who already knew it. Kuki fighters used the jungle itself as a weapon. Narrow trails perfect for ambush, dense cover for retreat, and an intimate knowledge of terrain the British had never bothered to learn. Villages were often fortified, with defensive stockades built to slow down advancing troops. The British, in turn, escalated. Unable to win quick, decisive battles, colonial forces resorted to a scorched earth strategy, burning villages, destroying grain stores, and cutting off food supplies, not just to defeat the fighters, but to break the will of the entire population supporting them. By the time the campaign wound down in 1919, well over 100 Kuki villages had been burned to the ground. It took the British more than a year, with thousands of additional troops brought in from other parts of India to bring the resistance under control. For a regional uprising that history barely remembers, that is a strikingly long time for an empire to need. The numbers alone don't capture what this war actually cost. Kuki losses, indirect fighting was significant, but the deeper devastation came from what followed. Burnt granaries meant famine. Displaced families meant disease. 2 full agricultural seasons were lost in a region where a single bad harvest could mean starvation. The British side suffered too, not just combat deaths, but a substantial number of soldiers lost to disease in hills their own army was never built to survive in. By the time it ended, an entire generation of Kuki villages had been rebuilt from ash, and almost none of it made it into the history books taught in the rest of India. Here's what makes this story even more complicated. Even today, what to call this conflict is disputed. Kuki organizations mark it as a war, a defining moment of organized resistance against colonial rule, deserving the same recognition as any other freedom struggle in Indian history. Every year, communities hold commemorations for what they call the Anglo-Kuki War. But other communities in the region contest that framing, arguing it should be remembered differently, as a rebellion, not a war, tied to specific local grievances rather than a broader independence movement. That disagreement isn't just academic. It sits inside a much larger, ongoing conversation in Manipur about identity, recognition, and whose history gets remembered, and whose gets left out of the national story entirely. Here's the uncomfortable truth. India's history books are full of the wars everyone agrees to remember. 1857, the freedom movement, the names we all learned in school. But the Anglo-Kuki War doesn't fit neatly into that story. It happened in a region most of India still overlooks, fought by people most textbooks never mention, over grievances most of the country has never had to think about. 2 years, over 100 villages burned, thousands of British troops needed to end it, and almost nobody outside Manipur has heard of it. History doesn't just remember the loud wars. It remembers the ones someone chose to keep telling. If this is the first time you're hearing this story, that's exactly the point. Subscribe, because there are a lot more of these forgotten chapters of Indian history still waiting to be told.